Joaquin Torres-García, the pioneer of constructivism in the Americas, died in this house on August 8, 1949. The house was designed by the artist, who watched over its building from day to day. Regrettably, he was able to live in it only during the last months of his life. The fish that presides over the facade is a recurring image in his work. For the early Christians, it symbolized faith. For the artist, however, it represented bodily or material reality. Torres-García held to his aesthetic ideas with the firmness of religious belief. Reacting to the Western Hemisphere tendency toward the restlessly flamboyant, he advocated a return to order and stability. In seeking to reveal inner structure, he turned objects into symbols, adopting the flat, two-dimensional technique employed by children or by primitive man. In so doing, however, he was guided by reason rather than by instinct. The problem for him was to impart to the asymmetrical an air of balance. He went about his task with the zeal of a standard-bearer engaged in combat. He held forth on his views both in speech and in print, lecturing and writing essays. The bibliography of his published books and pamphlets is considerable. Torres lived to be 75. He was born in Montevideo, the capital of Uruguay, at the mouth of the broad river La Plata. One of the busiest ports in South America, it was then strongly influenced by European culture. Today, it is a rapidly growing metropolis, with a social, economic, and cultural life of its own. As a port, it continues of fundamental importance for the South Atlantic trade. The artist was born in 1874, on what was called Oxcart Square. Today, the site is occupied by the Legislative Palace. Life was very different 100 years ago. Torres' father, a cabinet maker by trade, came from Catalonia. His mother was Uruguayan. This is what 18th of July Avenue looked like toward the end of the last century. Today, it is the capital's main traffic artery. Even in his early years, Torres-García was capable of bold drawing that does not seem at all childlike. Here is a view of Montevideo at the time when the Torres family decided to emigrate to Europe. The son was 17 when he and his parents set sail from Uruguay, bound for Spain. They disembarked in Barcelona, a city of flowers and palatial buildings, which served as a sort of anteroom to French culture in the Iberian Peninsula. Phoenicians and Greeks had figured in Barcelona's early Mediterranean past. Shortly after his arrival, the young Uruguayan enrolled in the School of Fine Arts. Capable of boldly expressive drawing, even as an untutored child, with the training he now received, he underwent rapid development. Soon he was able to produce this self-portrait. Under the influence of the French culture that poured into Spain through Barcelona, artists of the young generation rejected their national tradition. These first works of Torres-García are in the French post-impressionist manner, marked by the subtleties of the intimists and the symbolists. Inspired by Toulouse-Lautrec, the guiding light of Art Nouveau at the end of the century, Torres began to do sketches and magazine illustrations in which he captured the Frenchman's strong rhythmic line. Here we see a portrait of Torres by Ramon Casas, a notable sketch artist whom the Uruguayan admired and respected. The most controversial Catalan of the period was the architect Antonio Gaudí, one of the strongest proponents of Art Nouveau. His Church of the Holy Family remains unfinished even today. Torres-García collaborated in several of Gaudí's projects. Torres also gave art lessons to young ladies of fashion, one of whom, Manolito Piña, he married in 1909. Manolita was to serve as the customary model for his portraits. More important, however, she was to prove a faithful companion and constant inspiration till the day of Torres' death. A new artistic influence made itself felt about the time of Torres' marriage, that of Puvis de Chavannes. a French painter who advocated a static type of classicism. The Uruguayan found it useful to follow Puvis' path, particularly in mural painting. In 1910, he was commissioned to do 2 murals for the Uruguayan pavilion at the Brussels Farm and Stock Fair. He and his new bride set off for Belgium. An important result of the trip was a sketchbook, which opens with a profile of Manolita. The firm, free-flowing line with which Torres noted his impressions evidences a great talent for drawing. These sketches of Brussels reveal, in addition, a keenly observant eye and the ability to sum up essential detail in a few vigorous strokes. After 5 months in the Belgian capital and 1 month in Paris, the couple returned to Barcelona. The visit to France strengthened Torres' interest in Puvis de Chavannes, whose influence was readily apparent both in the recently painted murals and in the works Torres presented in a one-man show at the Dalmau Gallery in Barcelona in 1912. Torres resumed his classes in art and crafts at the Mont d'Or School, where he had begun to teach in 1908. He was commissioned to do a number of murals for the municipal building. Inspired by the work of Puvis de Chavannes, they aroused controversy and were long kept under cover. He also painted frescoes at Mont Repos, his villa in the outskirts of Barcelona. Here we see him with Manolita and their children, Olympia, Ifigenia, and Augusto. Judging by the calm, classic composition of the photograph, the painter must have arranged the pose. Like his wife before them, Torres' 3 children were to figure frequently in his works. As early as 1917, Torres began to experiment with dividing flat surfaces into rectangular sections, arranging them asymmetrically. This was the point of departure for Torres' Constructivism. The new manner began to appear more and more frequently in his flat-surfaced syntheses of external reality, as in these urban views of Barcelona painted between 1917 and 1919. At this critical juncture, wearied of Barcelona and the old world, Torres decided to try his luck in the great cultural center of New York, traveling there by way of Paris in 1920. In Manhattan, he did a few expressionist oils, and as always, portraits notable for their penetrating subjectiveness and freedom of execution. Spanish friends had urged him to continue in New York the business of designing and producing toys, which he had initiated on a commercial scale in Barcelona. The toys, made of wooden blocks, were schematic in detail and humorous in intent. The example of his father, the cabinet maker, may in part account for Torres' interest in working with wood. Problems of various kinds frustrated this effort of Torres to profit economically from his art. He decided to return to Europe to see whether there he could find the means of saving the business. He went first to Italy. Later, the toys were produced in Paris. The toys bear a close relationship to the polychrome wood compositions in the cubist manner that crop up from time to time throughout Torres' life as an artist. A new album of drawings brought the Manhattan period to a close. Entitled Goodbye, New York, it consists of crayon sketches, less sharply defined than those of Brussels, though they convey very well the dynamic spirit of the great metropolis. (1922) found Torres in Italy, making a supreme effort to save the toy business. He spent about a year there, partly in Genoa, partly in Leghorn. Meanwhile, a warehouse fire destroyed the stock he had left in New York. In Leghorn, his fourth child, Horacio, was born. From Leghorn, Torres went to France. At Villefranche, he did a little sketching and began to be intrigued by Cubism. Eventually, he settled in Paris. New acquaintances led him to new experiences. As one can see from these examples, he found himself drawn to the work of Modigliani and Jawlensky. This Adam of African and Cubist lineage suggests constructivism in the anatomy of the torso. In figure painting, Torres resorted to geometric drawing, superimposing outline on color. In city scenes, he adopted various Cubist devices. In Paris, in 1929, he became acquainted with artists who had only recently begun to follow a direction similar to the one he was taking. The neoplasticists Mondrian and Van Teursberg opened up new horizons for him. Together with the critic Michel Seufor, he founded a group known as Circle and Square, which welcomed exponents of new experiments deriving from Cubism. The group held its first exhibition in 1930. In this photo, taken at the opening, we see Torres-García, Mondrian, and Arp in the foreground, Kandinsky to the right, and Seufor and Van Torngello to the left, together with other artists and their wives. The group continued to follow the neoplasticist line taken by the founders. For example, it asserted that a picture is no more than a flat surface on which the predominant element should be the straight line. That balance results from proportion, and that composition should be based on asymmetry. Torres enriched his artistic ideology with symbols of his own devising. A key represents reason. A triangle stands for the mind. A fish stands for the body, or for brute matter. A heart represents the soul. It is curious to note that Torres' clocks, their hands forming a right angle, always show the same time of day. His masks look less European than pre-Hispanic American. Scales, the sun, and staircases are constantly recurring images. The European crisis of the 30s obliged Torres to return temporarily to Spain. In 1932, he arrived in Madrid. The Spanish Republic was then but a year old. Torres did little in the way of painting, and in what he did do, he showed an increasing interest in pre-Columbian America. He illustrated and hand-lettered a translation of Walt Whitman. Torres had matured in Paris, and he needed something different to satisfy his creative urge. He found it in a rediscovery of America, of the unforgotten land where he was born. In 1934, 43 years after Torres' departure for Europe, Montevideo continued calm and orderly, suspended in time, provincial in its ideas. In painting, Uruguay had produced artists such as Figari and Baratas, but both had emigrated, seeking better opportunities elsewhere. When Torres proceeded to air his avant-garde ideas, the local critics and artists proclaimed open warfare on constructivism. Softening his severely internationalist approach to thematic material, Torres permitted himself a few allusions to native subjects. Among his hieroglyphs, we begin to find such symbolic elements as the pediments of neoclassical facades, the Uruguayan flag, locomotives, and ox carts. Montevideo was making itself felt in Torres' austere compositions, although without weakening the solidity of their underlying concept. Quite to the contrary, his work was thereby rendered more dynamic and personal. His first exhibit aroused indignant criticism. Torres replied by giving lectures, declaring on one occasion, "I have said many times that, so far as I know, I am the first to have drawn a line between painting and monumental constructive art. I have also said that painting derives from what is personal and individual, whereas constructive art derives from what is universal." A few young artists turned to him for guidance, leading him to open a workshop. He did not cease to paint with feverish intensity. And all the while, he was publishing books. Obsessed by the urge to create, he made every minute count. His system of hieroglyphs acquired increasing cohesion and firmness, producing effects suggestive of solid stone. In the paintings he did between 1934 and 1938, one can see the germ of what was to be one of his creative masterpieces. This is the Cosmic Monument, located in Montevideo's Rodó Park. Built of pink granite, it is composed of 3 blocks. The central wall is patterned on those raised by the Incas. It is formed of irregular quadrangles, each of which is marked with one of Torres-Garcia's symbols. In his final sketch, the artist indicated on the paper that the concept of the monument was inspired and ruled by the sun. With the sun as its epicenter, the monument seeks to situate itself in the cosmos by the balance of its structure. The left-hand block represents the sun. The right-hand block stands for the 4 directions. The central block is crowned by the 3 geometric figures Torres worshipped above all: the cube, the sphere, and the pyramid. In the monument, the artist reveals the source to which he had gone for inspiration: ancient America, the essence of whose age-old mystery he came close to attaining. The same can be said for this painting entitled Indo-America, as well as this other, likewise based on pre-Hispanic motifs. The asymmetrical joints of Inca wall structure dominate an extensive phase of Torres' work. Sometimes the presentation is flat. Sometimes there is a suggestion of bulk. But all the paintings of this period are marked by asymmetry, rhythm, and the use of the so-called golden section. In working out the asymmetrical composition of his works, Torres consistently applied this principle, whereby the smaller of 2 parts stands in the same relation to the larger as the larger does to the whole. For his measurements, Torres made use of Luca Pacioli's compass, so highly esteemed by Renaissance artists. The mysterious mathematics of the golden section establishes a ratio between the sides of the rectangle that banishes symmetry and decorative repetitiveness. It exerted a veritable fascination upon the Uruguayan artist. Its importance lies in the fact that it enabled him to derive original effects from the most ancient of traditions and to adapt to present-day use ideas stemming from the remote past. The workshop Torres established numbered among its pupils not only his sons Augusto and Horacio, but also youths in search of new ideas, such as Julio Alpuy, José Gurvich, Alceo Ribeiro, Gonzalo Fonseca, and Francisco Matos. They placed a religious faith in the theories of the master. Some, in their zeal, became exaggeratedly orthodox in their obedience to those theories, which Torres himself never imposed as rules, but merely proposed as examples capable of opening up new horizons. The workshop issued its own publications. Today it is the Torres-García Museum, in which works of both teacher and pupils are to be found in varying proportion. As a sideline to his constructivist works, Torres executed portraits of famous people after the fashion of celebrated composers indulging themselves in divertimento. In some cases, he painted the subject more than once over a period of years. Here we have two likenesses of Velázquez and two of Goya. In each case, the earlier version is closer in resemblance to the model, whereas the later one is altogether expressionistic. It was thus that Torres came to paint Leonardo, Cézanne, Bach, and many others. Torres-García was a tireless worker. In the period 1941 to 1943, he brought out two important books. One was The City Without a Name, issued as the facsimile of an illustrated manuscript, in which the author's aesthetic ideas are set forth in the form of a novel. The other book, Universal Constructivism, sums up his writing in the field of art. It is by all odds his longest and most highly developed literary effort. In 1943, the native element in his work became intensified. His symbols took on a relationship to Montevideo, its buildings, its ports, its streetcars, and its ships. A struggle was going on between the abstract and the representation, but on a friendly, sportive plane. The artist's two dominating preoccupations were America on the one hand and flat surface effects on the other. The culminating achievement of this phase of Torres' development consists in the great murals he was commissioned to do for the Saint Bois Hospital. These were executed with the help of his pupils. 7 of the panels are of his design. 20 are the work of his assistants. An atmosphere of grandeur emanates from these murals. First painted in enamel on the walls, they were later transferred to canvas, and today they belong to the National Art Museum of Montevideo. Here, Torres-García's hieroglyphs appear on a monumental scale. Far from losing in intensity, they shine forth in brilliant color. Providing a note of contrast and repose are 2 black and white panels that alternate in the overall design. They have the air of elements of a frieze, carved in relief from limestone or chalk. This is painting which imitates sculpture. Both of the panels are undeniable echoes of America's ancient past, with something of the magic spirit to be found in the carved reliefs of Uxmal, or Teotihuacan. In commemoration of the centennial of Torres-García's birth, extensive exhibitions of his work have been organized. One, undertaken by the University of Texas at Austin, is to circulate among a number of institutions in the Americas. Another, assembled by the National Art Museum of Montevideo, has already been seen at the National Museum of Fine Arts in Buenos Aires. It is to circulate through other parts of our hemisphere and Europe as well. Torres-García has been the object of a cult in Uruguay for a number of years. However, this exhibit aroused new devotion and increased respect in the young people who thronged the galleries daily, from the hour they opened in the morning. School children and college students, provided with an overall view of his work, learned to revere the name of an illustrious Uruguayan who lived humbly but fought stubbornly for his ideas. Those ideas, based on order, he disseminated by every possible means. He incorporated them into his own home. The house on Caramuru streets, which he designed and saw rise brick by brick, retains the stamp of his ideas in its grillwork and reliefs, in the sculptured objects attached to the walls, and in the little stained glass windows that gleam like jewels in the light of the sun. cats bound about among the sculptures. The carved reliefs break the monotony of the brick walls. The fish that served Torres as a symbol swims in the garden pool. Amid these calm, quiet surroundings in which his ideas had been put into practice, the master artist lived but briefly before his death. His family had preserved the dwelling intact. Horacio, a painter, is the youngest of his children. The eldest is Olimpia. Manolita lives for her husband's memory. Ifigenia is a student of her father's life. Augusto, like Horacio, engages in painting. All that is lacking is the artist himself. Yet in spirit, he is ever present, and one can hear echoes of the past.
When he got off the boat, someone warned him, don't show people your modern constructivist paintings. Show them the ones they'll understand.
Yes, some writer or other said that.
He gave his first show at the Gallery of the Friends of Art. Some of the people who came to see it found it interesting, but they were mighty few.
Some people attacked him.
Oh, yes. There were plenty of them. And the argument about the paintings went on forever.
Inside the house are the pieces of furniture and other objects made by the artist's own hands that accompanied him throughout his life. This bookcase, for example, constructivist and asymmetrical in design. Here is a jar from Tiwanaku, whose decoration suggested ideas to him. And here are Carajá Indian figurines from Brazil. Here are his arms of combat, books and brushes. And here is the artist himself, of noble, firm bearing. His concepts have transcended his life. Augusto and Horacio have provided his final resting place with a granite monument, which guards his repose. It will stand but for a time, a century or so perhaps, but the glory of Joaquin Torres-García, the Uruguayan who sought to recapture the artistic essence of America, will live throughout eternity.